Every weekend, Book TV brings you 48 hours of history, biography, and public affairs. Here's a quick look at one of our programs.
In addition to a questionnaire that covered a wide variety of background items, the YAF members were asked to imagine the nation's history from 1966 to the end of the century, in other words, the year 2000. And so they were looking ahead for 34 years and imagining what they perceived or what they were viewing as what would happen to our country for the remainder of the century. And the graduate student who was doing this study, Richard Bromgart, was surprised by what he described as the belief of YAF members that a continued drift to the welfare state and socialism and moral decay would be reversed in the near future by an awakening of the American people, resulting in moving the train of events back to common sense. Brongott also surveyed members of Students for a Democratic Society, which was the leading New Left or leftist organization on campuses of the 60s, and the Young Democrats and the college Republicans. And he reported on his results in an article that he co-wrote and was published in an academic journal. It's interesting to view some of the projections of these YAF members in 1966. One YAF member predicted a redirection of American society towards freedom and conservative principles. Remember again, he's writing in 1966, and here's what he said. The United States, led by hypocritical and unprincipled leaders, becomes very bureaucratic and increasingly socialistic. The United States generally loses the battles in foreign affairs because it does not present its philosophy of free enterprise, libertarian beliefs, etc., as well as it should. Sounds almost familiar to the current day, doesn't it? Finally, as he predicted, in the 1980s or thereabouts, the American people realized that economic security is not necessarily freedom. They realize their freedoms are being abridged. They realize the economy is becoming too regimented and the government too bureaucratic. The people will then change the trend of events back to common sense conservative principles of government. Remember, his prediction was 1980. And if you recall from history, 1980, as it turned out, was indeed the year in which the American people voted for a conservative president, Ronald Reagan, who did indeed change the trend of events back to common sense conservative principles of government. Brongott cited another YAFer as predicting the following events in the near future from 1966 to 2000. His predictions were as follows. 1968, Republican victory. 1972, Reagan elected president. 1976, Reagan reelected. 1978, fall of Soviet Russia. 1980, fall of Red China. 1985, end of welfare, Social Security, and Medicare. 2000, end of unions. Now, as Brongott and his co-author noted, compared with their SDS counterparts on the left, YAFers seemed to have a mountain of naive faith. Well, let's look back nearly 45 years later, and we can see that this naive faith seems to have been rather accurate in its prediction of future events. Change a few of the dates, modify a few of the conclusions, and these YAF members, who were then only high school and college students, have laid out the political history of the last third of the 20th century. Because consider, Nixon's victory in 1968 brought both a realignment of American politics as well as, admittedly, the disgrace of Watergate, impeachment, and resignation. Reagan's victory came 8 years after the Yaffer had predicted, but was indeed followed by a landslide re-election. It took 9 more years for the Berlin Wall to fall, closely followed by the demise of the Soviet Union. Then, in his 1993 State of the Union message, a new Democratic president promised to, quote, end welfare as we know it. And the reforms of our welfare system were enacted a short while later when Republicans gained a majority in Congress in 1994. 2 years after that original State of the Union message, that same president declared, quote, the era of big government is over, in his State of the Union message.
You don't have to wait for the weekend to watch our programs. Watch online at booktv.org and follow us on Twitter.